The Nikon AFS 200 to 500mm f5.6 lens versus the Nikon Z 180 to 600mm f5.6 to 6.3 lens. The big question going around, should you upgrade? Find out next. Let me start off by saving you a little bit of time here. If you're a Nikon Z mount owner and you've clicked on this video wanting to work out which lens you should buy, go buy this. This is the Nikon Z 180 to 600mm Z mount lens. There you go. That was pretty quick, wasn't it? But this video isn't about which lens you should buy. This video is for those who are undecided whether to upgrade their current Nikon 200 to 500mm lens for the all-new Nikon Z 180 to 600mm lens. Until the recent release of the Nikon Z 180 to 600mm lens, photographers have been using the 200 to 500 via the FDZ or FDZ2 adapters on their Z mount cameras. So do you upgrade or do you stay with your current setup? Let's have a look at some of the specs, size and weight comparisons to begin with. The 200 to 500mm weighs in at 2,300 grams or 2,090 grams without the collar, whereas the Z 180 to 600mm lens weighs 2,140 grams or 1,955 grams without the tripod collar. So they're pretty close in weight. Both have 95mm filter threads and minimum focus distance on the 200 to 500 is 2.2 meters. And on the 180 to 600mm, 1.3 meters on the wide end. However, at 600mm, it's 2.4 meters, which is slightly longer in distance than the 200 to 500. The prices on each of these lenses at the time of making this video, on average, the 200 to 500mm retails for 2,400 Australian dollars or 1,400 US dollars. And the new Z 180 to 600mm, it retails for 2,999 Australian dollars or 1,700 US dollars. Now here's some comparisons between focal lengths between the two lenses. You don't see too much difference on the wide end of each lens. The same story goes on the long ends. If you're a bird and wildlife shooter like I am, then let's face it, we're always wanting that little bit of extra reach. The Z 180 to 600mm gives you that no problem. Same goes for moon photography. Here's my first shot with the Nikon Z 180 to 600mm of the moon as it was coming over the horizon while it was still daylight. This shot is at 600mm and is cropped 100%, and there was a bit of haze looking through the Earth's atmosphere. So far we're seeing that the lenses are pretty close in everything. Let's go and have a look at some sharpness tests. The 200 to 500mm here is on the left and the Z 180 to 600mm is on the right. Here's a comparison between the two at their maximum focal lengths using the minimum apertures of 5.6 and 6.3. Okay, here's the same shot stopped down to f8 and f11. So there's not much difference between the two, is there, in terms of sharpness? I also used the same settings on the wide end of each lens, and again, I'd be splitting hairs here. One thing I actually did pick up while doing this test, while focusing manually, the 200 to 500mm was a little easier to deal with, but the Z 180 to 600mm was a little touchy on the focus ring, as in it appeared to skip or jump instead of smoothly focus in or out. That being said, it's hard to pick a winner here. In fact, I went back and forth so many times between the two of them, they were both on par in terms of sharpness. That's one of the first things that struck me when I had the 200 to 500 for testing, was just how sharp it was. So if you were thinking of upgrading in the hope you're going to be getting sharper images, I think this test has shown you otherwise. Some of the advantages that this Z 180 to 600mm lens has over that 200 to 500. First one, the minimum to maximum focal length throw. It's so quick on this 180, 600. It's that quick. I remember when I had the 200 to 500, I described it as winding a clock. You literally got to go 1, 2 to get to 500. Second is that this lens at 180 millimeters, it's got a minimum focus distance of just 1.3 meters. And the third is the balance. I remember when I picked up the 200 to 500 and I extended it out for the first time to 500 and it was like this. I wasn't used to it. Having the lens extend out, I felt the weight move forward type of thing. And so I had to adjust my style and stance when using that lens. With this one, you don't have to worry about that. It's an internal zoom. So this is really good using it handheld and on a gimbal. The 200 to 500 millimeter does have an external VR switch. You can switch off and on very quickly. Whereas with the new Z 180 to 600 millimeter, you have to activate that VR inside the Z cameras via the menu. So let's get down to the nitty-gritty of this video. Should you upgrade from your old AFS 200 to 500 to the brand new Z 180 to 600 millimeter lens? Well, my advice is this. If you're happy with your current 200 to 500 millimeter and it's doing the job you need it to do, then keep it. It's a great lens. Maybe upgrade at a later stage when the new Z lens has dropped in price. You might be in the same situation I am. You might own some older Nikon DSLRs that you still love using, like my beloved D750 and D850 cameras, but you also have a newer Nikon Z mount body. In that case, it very well may be worth hanging on to your 200 to 500 millimeter so you can use that lens on all your cameras. If you sold your 200 to 500 millimeter, you'd only be able to use that new Z lens on the Z camera. You can, however, use that 200 to 500 millimeter on all the cameras and on the Z via the FTZ or FTZ2 adapter. On the flip side of the coin though, if you're in a situation where you now own just a Z mount camera and you are tired of the unbalanced, the push-pull style zoom, which is much slower than the new Z 180 to 600 millimeter, then I would consider upgrading, given the new Z mount lens does have some advantages over the 200 to 500. As we move forward and new Z model cameras are released in the years to come, because let's face reality here, Nikon won't be releasing any new F-mount DSLR cameras anytime soon. You'd be set up better to use that 180 to 600 millimeter on future Z mount cameras. And that's the precise reason why I bought this Nikon Z 180 to 600 millimeter lens. It's for when I buy future and fingers crossed, hopefully budget-friendly Z mount cameras as they become available. I will always be keeping my Nikon DSLR cameras and using them in the future. Reason being is I love them. But I won't be buying any more F-mount lenses in the future and instead opting to use the current range of F-mount lenses I own now. Those F-mount lenses have and are serving me extremely well. Plus, I can put them on my Z7 via this FTZ2 adapter. Well guys, I hope this has helped you out in terms of should you upgrade or not. I wish you the very best of luck. Never stop creating. I'll see you next time.